The one and only Eva Grant has done it. Locked away in her seemingly innocuous home in the middle of the Southwest desert, she has found a connection that no other YouTuber has made. A connection unparalleled. Could two men, generations apart, be so alike, yet so different? Who? Why, Kane Parsons and Orson Welles, in fact.
When I say Orson Welles, you probably don't immediately think of internet horror icon Kane Parsons. Unless, of course, you follow Michael Scott mnemonic naming devices and tie the name to some obscure reference. You, Babyface, Young in Hollywood, Orson Welles, Citizen Kane, you're Kane Parsons. Okay, Backrooms. You've heard of it, right? I mean, you clicked on my video. But if not, Backrooms is the highly anticipated horror darling being put forth by famed indie studio A24. Now, it's not just the unsettling, never-ending rooms causing a stir. It's the fact that the creative mind behind it, the director, is 20-year-old Kane Parsons, better known as Kane Pixels on YouTube. The film, with a budget of $10 million, has already made box office history for A24, bringing their highest opening weekend earnings of $81 million domestically and $118 million globally. The film is not only setting records for indie horror, it's brought new life to internet lore. Parsons has taken something iconic online and transformed it further, making it a film where the villain isn't just the buildings or the people you encounter. It's your mind, reaching nearly Lynchian levels of psychological horror. Backrooms, the movie, is based off of the YouTube series Backrooms by Kane Pixels, which was based off of Backrooms, the creepypasta from the early 2010s that originated on 4chan. The original image of a renovated hobby town was the Genesis pic in around 2003. The first incarnation of the creepypasta reads, quote, "If you're not careful and you no-clip out of reality in the wrong areas, you'll end up in the backrooms, where it's nothing but the stink of old, moist carpet, the madness of mono yellow, the endless background noise of fluorescent lights at maximum humbuzz, and approximately 600 million square miles of randomly segmented empty rooms to be trapped, and God save you if you hear something wandering around nearby, because it sure as hell has heard you." The Backrooms is one of the reigning internet horror tales with 1,000 levels described in the wiki. The idea was creepy enough on its own, spreading through online chats and capturing that vaporwave liminal internet aesthetic, leaving viewers uneasy, feeling like they've been there before. Then, in 2022, a 16-year-old Kane Parsons took the idea to a new level, transforming the photo and the stories into a viral web series, bringing grainy VHS found footage life to the Backrooms and spreading like wildfire online. He brought people outside the internet horror game inside. A24 usually knows a good idea when they see it and snatched Kane up and set him to direct the film that critics are almost entirely positive about. Citizen Kane, directed by Orson Welles and released in 1941, has been recognized as one of the greatest films, well, ever. Critics raved about it 75 years ago, and still to this day, it's been cemented as one of the iconic standards of Hollywood. The film is about solving the mystery of the last words, Rosebud, uttered by one of the richest men in the world, Charles Foster Kane. The film explores his life and death. It was surprisingly modern for the time. It's not just the techniques utilized by Welles, it's his exploration of the human psyche, exploring a life seemingly only from the outside, but actually as a deep introspection of the mind. So, how do these two directors connect? Like, seriously, I'm going to piece together internet horror and the greatest film ever made? Yes I am, and here's how it's gonna go down. First, we'll look at the parallels. Obviously, you all want to know how these two directors are bizarrely similar. It's not just their lives and abilities, no, it's also their exploration of the subconscious. Next, hear me out, we'll talk about Freud and Jung.
But while Fraser is a Freudian, I am a Jungian. So there'll be no blaming Mother today.
Crazy, I know, but we're gonna see how these two champions of the brain fit right into my argument. Lastly, from there, we'll explore horror elements of liminality and the uncanny. The first similarity between these two that caught my attention: age. Orson Welles entered the Hollywood stage at the young age of 25 with his directing, writing, and starring in Citizen Kane. Before that, he was an 18-year-old actor. As David Thompson states in his biography Rosebud, quote, "It was frequently an opening remark of wonder as people reported on him that he was so young, yet he gave off airs of mastery and experience that made 18 seem absurd or that raised suspicions of fraud or dislocation in this large young man." People were often shocked that such a young person held such a strong presence on stage and off of it. After making headway in theater, he was a 21-year-old stage director, leading infamous stage plays like the entirely African-American-led Macbeth put on for the Federal Theater Project in New York City, and narrating and directing the memorable War of the Worlds radio drama at the age of 23. Kane Parsons started his YouTube journey with the usual YouTube memes, and then by 14 created a web series called Project 209, a thriller mystery set in the Dad Feels universe. After that series ended in 2021, he did a series of shorts based off of the Attack on Titan anime. By 2022, at the age of 16, he started his Backrooms shorts. By 19, he became A24's youngest director, their Wunderkind, with his bare-bones horror sci-fi film, Backrooms. Okay, both Orwell and Parsons were relative babies in Hollywood. What else? Well, they had similar rises to fame, with their viral horror and sci-fi stories. Let's take a look at Orson Welles and his War of the Worlds radio drama. A drama that was marketed as a production by the Mercury Theater through CBS, but Americans tuning in to the broadcast on October 30th, 1938, were almost entirely convinced that aliens were attacking, that the world was ending.
We make out a small beam of light against a mirror. What's that? There's a jet of flame springing from the mirror.
Panic ensued in many places, and police apparently stormed the studio after the broadcast. It was that night that solidified Welles as a household name, a man who scared the living shit out of Americans. Welles took H.G. Wells' novel of the same name and brought life to it, and reached more listeners and brought new fame to the story. Similarly, Kane brought a creepy pasta to life with his web series. It took off because it added depth and dimension to the story. People could more easily imagine falling victim and into these mysterious rooms. Just as people listened to Orson tell a convincing story of a Martian attack, viewers could see what it would be like if the backrooms really did exist in our world, how people might investigate them, what they meant, how they could escape. Hell, Parsons even did his series in a found footage style, making it feel realistic to viewers. Now, I don't think anyone fell for it, but who's to say? Not only do both directors know how to creep fans the fuck out, they are also known for their technical prowess, for using different media to tell a story. With Wells's Citizen Kane, he didn't invent anything new, but he put together a number of techniques to tell a story and make it feel modern and new, like nothing else. Take, for instance, Chiaroscuro. Welles plays with shadow throughout the film. He hides faces, especially the titular character, Charles Foster Kane. Kane, one of the wealthiest men in the world, brings darkness to those around him. Characters hide in obscurity in his great shadow. The film also utilizes non-linear story and jump cuts. They disorient the viewer. They can make us see a transformation of a character or see them in a brand new light. They make our narrator unreliable, so we have to figure out the story for ourselves. Much like Welles, Kane Parsons didn't invent anything new, but he did blend plenty of unique elements together. Speaking of blending, he used the software Blender to create his version of the Backrooms. Within his story framework, he also used some of the Valve game Portal, giving his series a game-like feel where the viewer is the main character. In addition, Parsons took his Blender file and recorded it with VHS, giving the Backrooms footage a realistic retro feel. Almost like found footage, another unique element integrated into the work. Parsons wasn't the first creator to play with the idea of found footage. That title is held by the 1999 film Blair Witch Project. No. Looks like it was Italian filmmaker Ruggero Deodato's Cannibal Holocaust in 1980. Actually, it was motherfucking Orson Welles in the 1970s with his Other Side of the Wind. Wait, looks like it's art house director Shirley Clarke. She had a film called The Connection in the 1960s, but I digress. Both Orson Welles and Kane Parsons have been seen as having some technical prowess in their filmmaking styles. What else? Well, we can look at the critical side of things. Critics of the time of Citizen Kane's release were overwhelmingly positive, much like the attention Parsons is getting today. Film buffs and regular viewers alike have cited Citizen Kane as the greatest film of all time. Backrooms? Well, it appears to be rewriting the genre, and people online talk of it as if it's the greatest horror of all time, or at least for the next week or so. Sorry, Obsession. Looking away from the directors, we see similarities in their stories. Let's be real, both can be seen as nihilistic. No clear purpose, moral, or meaning behind events. Citizen Kane is about the death of a tycoon, but the end, he's dead, and the journalists don't have any answer to his final words. Rosebud harkens back to Kane's childhood, but in the end, that's burned up in flames, and he's still dead. In Backrooms, the creation of the rooms seem meaningless. They exist and you're there. We have endless, dull, droll, humdrum rooms that leave visitors with little answers, just nothing, or death. If we look away from nihilism, we get to an adjacent idea. They could be both forms of purgatory. In Citizen Kane, we have a life relived over and over and over again to find an answer that no one, aside from the audience, will get an answer to. In a way, perhaps Charles Foster Kane is reliving his life until he accepts his wrongs or accepts the truth of his abandonment. In Backrooms, we can view this as an eternal waiting room, the place we all end up while we wait for the pearly gates upstairs. Lastly, these stories clearly explore some form of the subconscious, the place where our memories and feelings exist. And that, my friends, is how we get to the other players in our story, Freud and Jung.
An amusing Freudian slip. He was having dinner with his wife, and he meant to say, "Pass the salt," but instead he said, "You've ruined my life, you blood-sucking shrew."
Sigmund Freud was an Austrian neurologist and father of psychoanalysis. Described in an introduction and brief overview of psychoanalysis, Freud developed the theories around psychoanalysis while researching and treating hysteria. Quote, his groundbreaking theory about the unconscious, proposing repressed memories and desires influence behavioral and emotional states. A revolutionary concept at the time, this theory would permanently leave its imprint on psychological thinking for centuries to come. Many of his insights frame classic stereotypes of psychology and psychologists. The couch, where a patient lays down and opens up. Hypnosis, done by the psychologist. Dream interpretation. Some of the more famous things that we associate with Freud are his ideas around the Oedipal complex and the Electra complex. You know, the suppressed desire to fuck our parents. This led to his ideas around the libido and sexual desire. Most importantly, to ideas around the subconscious are Freud's notion of the id, ego, and superego. The id is our basic instinctual needs. Think of your impulses and desires. Freud's precious libido resides here. The ego is your reality check. It's what rationalizes the id and acts as a sort of mediator of the mind. The superego is your conscious and is formed through cultural, societal, and familial norms, all authority figures. It aims for perfection. Id, superego, and ego equate to instinct, reality, and morality. Okay, so what about Jung?
Niles Crane, hung specialist.
Carl Jung was a Swiss psychologist and psychiatrist who founded the School of Analytical Psychology. He was Freud's contemporary and in many ways seen as his foil. Hell, his founding of analytical psychology came out of work with Freud in the field of psychoanalysis and his major theoretical differences, which led ultimately to a friendship breakup. Psychoanalysis focuses on the unconscious mind, libido, repression, childhood experiences, and sexual and aggressive drives at the center. Analytical psychology has an overall goal of achieving wholeness and self-realization and betterment. It focuses on a notion of the collective unconscious, connecting humanity as a whole. Archetypes that help us explain dreams and connections to others through modern time and history. Carl Jung explains in his The Concept of the Collective Unconscious that the collective unconscious lies deeper within us and our personal psyche. Quote, "There exists a second psychic system of collective, universal, and impersonal nature which is identical in all individuals. This collective unconscious does not develop individually, but is inherited. It consists of pre-existent forms, the archetypes, which can only become conscious secondarily and which give definite form to certain psychic contents. The collective unconscious is passed down and inside all of humanity. It's impersonal, meaning it's not tied to any one person at all." He uses this notion of the archetype to explain the connection. The archetype is basically a symbol we use to understand the connections. For Jung, there are 4 main ones used to describe an individual: the persona, the shadow, anima, and self. Then there are 12 or so character archetypes that you could connect with, like an explorer, creator, hero, trickster, just to name a few. So what do these giants of psychology have to do with Citizen Kane and Backrooms? Well, one can be easily viewed under a psychoanalytic lens and the other an analytical psychology lens. I see Citizen Kane as matching up well with Freudian psychoanalytical, like from a Freudian psychoanalytic standpoint. With Citizen Kane, the last words uttered by our main character, Rosebud, are a direct repression. It's a symbol of his childhood taken away from him, his gleeful days sledding in the Rocky Mountains. For him, the truest moments of happiness. Now, not only that, we can easily read things with our Freudian glasses and see Kane as having a major Oedipal complex, given his likely mommy issues from being signed away to a man who basically represents a bank. Aside from childhood trauma and repression, we can view this entire film as an exploration of one individual, his personal conscious. His id can be seen through his aggressive outbursts and sexual desires for his mistress. His ego keeps him doing the everyman things like having a wife and child. His superego drives him to start a paper with an actual ethos, built for the people, and, also please his mom and be the richest, most successful man ever. I mean, that must have been her goal, right? Why else push him away to be raised and managed by his trust? The whole film becomes not only a mystery of this tycoon's last words, but an exploration of his entire psyche. Every action and reaction Charlie Kane gives on screen is a reflection of his inner demons, his subconscious. Last, but certainly not least, one very clear message in the film was death, and Mr. Freud had some ideas on the topic, mainly that all paths lead to death. Sensible, right? In his essay, Beyond the Pleasure Principle, Freud states, quote, "The postulate of self-preservative instincts we ascribe to every living being stands in remarkable contrast to the supposition that the whole life instinct serves the one end of bringing about death." This basically means, despite all basic instincts to stay alive, the purpose of living is to die. Our very own Charles Foster Kane seems to realize that. Think of the very first images we see in the film, his precious kingdom of Xanadu, a monument to his life and everything that is Charles Foster Kane. Something great, powerful, overbearing, that's going to stand the test of time when he ultimately perishes. It's his personal relic. Michael Enkel writes of this very monument in his essay, Citizen Kane and Psychoanalysis, stating, quote, "The foremost adversary of the myth creator is death, and his most important aim is, at least to some extent, to win over this eventually invincible adversary, to create a monument which defies time and restricts the perishability of everything human." When Kane is gone, Rosebud up in flames, Xanadu haunts the world and forces all to remember his name. Just as the Egyptians built the Great Pyramids of Giza thousands of years ago, Charlie Kane cemented his legacy in the walls of the Xanadu compound. Alright, let's get to less depressing shit. You know, falling into the backrooms with possibly no hope of escape. If Citizen Kane fits in with psychoanalysis, then the backrooms pairs well with Jungian analytic psychology. When it comes to the backrooms brand as a whole, two things in particular stand out as matching well. Those two things are Jung's ideas of the collective unconscious and his notion of archetypes. The backrooms exist for not one person, but all. They are free of time and simply exist. Why not exist as a perfect median for the collective unconscious to flourish? Not only does this zone feel like a place where all and none are together, the project itself acts as a way to connect us. Samantha J. Stephen writes in The Backrooms, Exploring the Unconscious Together Through Collective Meaning-Making, that the backrooms, quote, could be a collective effort to explore and manifest the unconscious, not only through fear in its many manifestations, but also as a journey that individuals take to deeper, more complex levels. She goes on to focus on the dreamlike nature of the backrooms and how this is a way of sharing unconsciousness. If we go on to see the backrooms as a representation for a collective unconscious, then we need one of Jung's archetypical figures to help us understand things. Jung states in his The Archetypes and the Collective Unconscious that, quote, there is good reason for supposing that the archetypes are the unconscious images of the instincts themselves. In other words, that they are patterns of instinctual behavior. If we're seeing the backrooms and exploring and navigating them as an instinct or instinctual behavior, then the Jungian archetype that fits best with this situation would be the trickster. The trickster typically acts as a boundary crosser. They don't follow rules, they break them. When we're falling in and out of these backrooms, when we aren't following any clear rules, just trying to understand this new world, of course this would be more fitting. When Jung described the trickster archetype in On the Psychology of the Trickster Figure, he states that the trickster was, quote, an archetypical psychic structure of extreme antiquity. In his clearest manifestation, he is a faithful reflection of absolutely undifferentiated human consciousness. So, a boundary crosser that is almost a cosmic being, animalistic and timeless, seems like it checks out for these never-ending, exhausting rooms that have no end or beginning. When we look at Kane Parsons' 2026 film, Jung still fits perfectly. Mary, our therapist, can be seen as a Jungian. She works to help her patients address their past selves and move toward wholeness and self-betterment. Her window method is her own way of addressing the subconscious, addressing problems, and getting better. It's a hope for the future, especially for young Mary, who looked at it as a form of escape when trapped in a house with her crazy mom. Not only is Mary a Jungian, we see the collective unconscious in a whole new light. The backrooms in the film is the collective unconscious. It takes everyone's memories who enter their bounds. It tries to remember you, places you've been, things you've interacted with. As an individual entering these rooms, you aren't just experiencing your subconscious, you're interacting with everyone's subconscious. Parsons' movie also includes archetypes throughout these endless rooms. I think the dinner table scene really encapsulates this. Who shows up? Warning, minor spoilers ahead. Okay. The redhead woman in the corner, red hair just like his wife. She's in a suit, looks kind of corporate, but overall she's very meek. She isn't necessarily Clark's wife as he imagined, but she becomes this archetypical figure in the situation. Obedient nearly to a fault, professional suit, like the lawyer she's trying to be. The fat man with lots of eyes represents a father figure. He provides food for his family when Clark takes him apart for a meal. He has eyes that are always watching. He's not threatening. He's just there as one would expect at the table. The man in the chair becomes the observer. He shines a light on things for the viewers by literally turning on his lamp, and he's also seen as not a threat. Then we have Backrooms or Pirate Clark, who represents the unchecked ego, the pleading, abusive, I can do nothing wrong guy. Clark uses all of these figures in his dinner scene where he acts out with Mary. He reenacts the moments his wife left him again. But this time, he wants validation from Mary that he did nothing wrong. Tied to the chair, she's forced to play his wife since she's the only one there who can actually speak. He scalps the woman with the red hair to make a wig for Mary to wear. The woman remains unflinching since these Backrooms people aren't supposed to react or feel anything. By the time we hear Backrooms Clark, the woman with the red hair runs to the opposite corner and she desperately claws at the wall like a caged animal. She dreads the monster. Mary pays attention to those cues and feels dread as well. Just like his wife, both women fear him. Why run from Backrooms Clark and not the Clark who scalped her? Real Clark is under control and predictable. He doesn't want to be the bad guy. Backrooms Clark, that unchecked ego, is abusive, out of control, unpredictable, and wants validation and love. If the woman in red is a degraded memory form of his wife, maybe it's even the version that Clark remembers of her, the version that's scared of him when he's drunk, when he's not himself. These archetypes are there for Clark to act out what he needs to validate, understand, and navigate the backrooms, his subconscious. Okay, let's move on to something almost everybody can agree on, the liminal and uncanny. Both forms of horror can easily fit into the Backrooms as well as Citizen Kane. When I was first introduced to the Backrooms, the word used to describe the work was liminal. But what does that actually mean? The liminal, or limen, means threshold, and is often associated with Jungians. They saw this threshold as a place for individuation to take place, for one to transcend into their better self. When we talk about things being liminal, we usually think of something in between. These could be stages of life. Cultural anthropologist Arnold van Gennep and Victor Turner researched rites of passages in cultures across the world and saw them as a form of liminality. Think of entering into adulthood or nearing death. It can also mean something temporarily displaced, like in time, or even something we encounter every day, twilight. That in-between moment of light and dark. It can also be a physical place. Think hallways, crossroads, borders. It can be a hotel room or airport, a place you're only supposed to be for a short time. As described in his article, Liminal Procedural Horror, Diego de Andrade et al. States, unlike traditional horror that has often centered on the concepts of predatory monsters, liminal horror is primarily about how the space itself can be the antagonist. The room, hallways, these back rooms are villains. They make you feel uneasy, walls closing in, even if they aren't. No end in sight. They're meant to be discomforting and unsettling. They're places you don't want to be for long. Donna Wyckoff states in Why a Legend? Contemporary Legends as Community Ritual that, quote, contemporary legends with their affinity for liminality seem particularly well suited for dealing with boundary issues. This means that the ever-frightening backrooms can be a place of transition, life, and death. Maybe we all fall into the backrooms at one point, a rite of passage. In a world connected and disconnected at the same time, maybe the backrooms is what we need. This liminal transition, of course, is not solely tied to the backrooms. However, it does fit with the story best. We can also get this sense of liminality in the ever-famous Citizen Kane. The whole premise of the film is about investigating the life of a man post-mortem. We witness his various transitions throughout life and ultimately death. The cultural anthropologist I mentioned before, Victor Turner, says in his work Liminality and Communitas that, quote, liminal entities are neither here nor there. They are betwixt and between the positions assigned and arrayed by law, custom, convention, and ceremonial. Charles Foster Kane is a liminal entity. Beyond the fact that we watch him go through his rite of passage, the big death we all face, he's liminal in the sense that he's outside of society. Nothing he does is familiar to us at a community or societal level. He's well beyond a normal person. He's able to buy whatever he wants, control the media, and most of all, create a giant omnipotent estate in his name to always be remembered. People often associate liminality in conjunction with the uncanny. However, I'd argue that they're each their own unique idea and feeling. Liminality is the in-between and weirdly familiar in a transient state. The uncanny is not. It's uncomfortable and not like anything we know. It shares similarities but feels off. The uncanny, a notion popularized in 1919 by Sigmund Freud in his essay Das Unheimliche, or the uncanny is the psychological feeling of being unsettled. Unheimlich in German literally means unhomely, Heimlich meaning familiar or belonging to the home. The uncanny is the sensation we get when something feels off. It's unfamiliar. It immediately makes us uneasy. Freud begins his essay explaining that just because something is new or unfamiliar doesn't make it immediately uncanny. That uncanniness comes from something else. He states, quote, "Something has to be added to what is novel and unfamiliar to make it uncanny. The better oriented in his environment a person is, the less readily will he get the impression of something uncanny in regard to the objects and events in it. There has to be some level of uncertainty the person feeling the uncanniness feels. Lots of things can be associated with the uncanny. Take, for instance, body doubles, helplessness, anxiety, a haunted house, and death. And what noteworthy film opens with a gothic, oppressive, likely haunted in some respect home that also has its creator die in its bounds? Why, Citizen Kane. The unsettling uncanniness exists in Welles' work, especially within the walls of Xanadu. It feels like a place that's existed or could have existed in our world, but something is off about it. It's a labyrinth meant to make you feel lost and hopeless within its walls. You're meant to feel small because you are small. You are no Charles Foster Kane. You're a fly on the wall. Nothing. The uncanniness comes from watching the life of Kane as well. The time jump cuts and uneven storytelling make you feel like you've seen it before, but you haven't. You feel as if Kane is a real person when he wasn't. The uncanny also exists in the backrooms. When it comes to the backrooms as a whole, we immediately feel that sense of unease and uncanniness. It's not home. We're lost and helpless. As explained in Day Cho and Natalie Underberg Good's Lost in Liminal Space, quote, "In the backrooms, liminality coexists with the uncanny, and encountering the phenomenon provokes an uneasy combination of nostalgia and anxiety, or recognition combined with the dread. There are no people in the backrooms. We're alone. The backrooms exist without time. They're an endless maze, a trap. They make us feel slightly familiar, like we've been there before with the dated paper and nondescript rooms. It's dreamlike. Like maybe you've been there before. However, you haven't been there. Walking through the halls and in the shorts that Parsons created, we don't belong and we desperately want to escape. In Backrooms, the movie, we may want to view the other selves as uncanny body doubles. On the surface, they do appear that way. They're versions of ourselves or those that we remembered, but off. Something's not quite right. However, since they end up as more of caricatures of ourselves, I'd argue that they fit more with those archetypes that we talked about earlier than as uncanny body doubles. Either way, the sense of liminality and uncanniness is meant to disturb viewers. It's not meant to placate and guide you with familiarity. You don't belong and you have to leave. Orson Welles and Kane Parsons, two creators existing outside of each other's timelines, both starry-eyed, young film visionaries. Not only do their lives seem to flow in somewhat similar paths, their works diverge and come together in their own way. I don't know about you, but I can't wait to see what else Kane Parsons does. Maybe he'll cement himself as an industry icon like Welles. Maybe he'll just no-clip into his own creation. Forced forced to be the Backrooms kid. Only time will tell. If you like what you saw, don't forget to like and subscribe for more media commentary. Later.